All right, hello and welcome to tonight's Daniel Island Historical Society speaker series. We are honored tonight to have Anna Catherine Carroll with us to speak. She is the Manager of Preservation Initiatives with the Preservation Society of Charleston, which if you don't know, it's the first locally based historic preservation organization in the U.S. As part of the Preservation Society's Advocacy Department, she oversees organizational research and outreach initiatives and supports advocacy efforts on issues and projects impacting Charleston's historic built environment. She is originally from North Carolina, and she earned her degree from the Honors College at College of Charleston in Historic Preservation and Community Planning. So welcome, Anna Catherine, and we look forward to hearing you talk tonight, your presentation on the Charleston Justice Journey.
Thank you, Jessica. I will share my screen here. We can get started. Let's see. Bear with me for a second. All right.
Just a reminder to the group, if you have any questions throughout the evening, just feel free to put it up in the Q&A and we will answer them as we get them.
Yes, sounds good. And you're more than welcome to ask them at the end as well. Hopefully we'll be able to save some time to have a discussion, which I would really love. So thank you all so much for having me. As Jessica said, my name's Anna Catherine. I'm Manager of Preservation Initiatives with the Preservation Society of Charleston, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this evening about the Preservation Society's ongoing research and mapping project, the Charleston Justice Journey, which is an initiative that really helps us elevate stories important to the journey toward racial equality in Charleston by conveying the relationship of this journey to historic places and structures. So before we dive into the story of the Charleston Justice Journey, or CJJ for short, which you'll hear me refer to it as throughout the presentation, I wanted to provide a quick overview of the Preservation Society and the work that we do throughout the Charleston region. So if you aren't familiar with the Preservation Society, as Jessica mentioned, we are a nonprofit, member-supported historic preservation advocacy organization, and the oldest in the nation at that. And even if you are not familiar with what we do, you may have visited our shop before. Here we are, located right at the corner of King and Queen Street in downtown Charleston. Or you may have also seen our many Carolopolis Awards, which we've got up here at the top of the screen, or historic markers that are located all throughout downtown. We have more than 1,400 Carolopolis Awards and hundreds of historic markers. So you may be more familiar with our work than you think. And as mentioned, we are the first locally based historic preservation organization in the United States. And we were actually founded 101 years ago tomorrow, April 21st, 1920, by a group of Charleston residents interested in protecting Charleston's threatened historic architecture. The first group, met at this very house pictured here, 20 South Battery, and formed under the leadership of Susan Pringle Frost, pictured here, as the Society for the Preservation of Old Dwellings. And the name was changed to the Preservation Society of Charleston in the 1950s to reflect our mission that was expanding beyond just dwellings. And I happen to think that that has a better ring to it as the Preservation Society of Charleston. The Society's first victory in the 1920s was actually halting the demolition of the Joseph Manigault House on Meeting Street, which many of you may be familiar with, which was to be razed for the construction of a proposed gas station at the time. So for many years, the Society's mission really was taking a building by building approach to preservation, and was very much concentrated in the downtown Charleston area as well, with many successes. But today, the demands of preservation are greater than ever before and wider spread than ever before. From flooding and sea level rise, to rapid growth and new construction, to increasing development pressure that really threaten the very existence of entire historic communities, the scope of our work is ever expanding. And we monitor issues and advocate for preservation in areas citywide, but not just in the city of Charleston, throughout the Low Country as well. And one of those key areas that we are working in right now really is the Kanehoy Peninsula. We have been very involved in recent issues, which you are all likely very aware of, involving conservation and cemetery preservation, just to name a couple. And we've really enjoyed the opportunity to partner with the Daniel Island Historical Society in these efforts, primarily with the Oak Bluff development on the site of the old ruins or Kanehoy Methodist Cemetery. And we look forward to opportunity for continued partnership, which is a good transition point into an overview of the Charleston Justice Journey, which is what we came here to talk about tonight. And so we also really feel that the Charleston Justice Journey is a project with unlimited potential for growth throughout the region. And so we look forward to that. As mentioned, CJJ is an online interactive research and mapping initiative that documents sites significant to our city's ongoing journey toward racial equality through the lens of historic places. And that's something that really sets the Charleston Justice Journey apart from other initiatives that endeavor to document Charleston's or just civil rights history in general. It's really that built environment, place-based approach and focus. And utilizing this virtual platform, we are working to document and share Charleston's undertold African-American history to reach a wider audience than ever before. That's the beauty of the online component. And it's important to note that Charleston's civil rights history is made up of countless scattered sites throughout the city and throughout the Low Country. And some are marked, like this marker here to Judge Jonathan Jasper Wright, which is on Queen Street, but many are not well documented, like the former Cannon Street YMCA on Cannon Street on the Charleston Peninsula, which served Charleston's Black community for decades and was one of the only YMCAs in the country to be led by an all African-American board of directors. Also associated with the Cannon Street All-Stars, a really important story about a youth Little League team and their fight for justice and civil rights in the 1950s. But worse than that, there are instances where these sites are not only not documented, but they've been lost altogether, which can be exemplified by what we are looking at here, which is Septima P. Clark's former residence on Henrietta Street that has been demolished and is no longer there to connect with, to understand the significance of the site. So this can really make telling the story of all of these scattered sites in a cohesive way really challenging. So through the Charleston Justice Journey, we aim to bring these stories to life by helping the community visualize the connection between these sites, events, and important people citywide, which really are interconnected. And so one of the primary goals of the Charleston Justice Journey is to help elevate the narrative of the long civil rights movement. So that really means to see the fight for racial equality as more than just a movement in the 1950s and 60s, which we've all been educated about and are familiar with, but as an integral part of the entire history of Charleston and the US at large. In Charleston, that starts in the 17th century. And so really we're grappling with the Charleston Justice Journey. How do we approach telling 300 plus years of civil rights related history? So to provide a bit of information on how this project got started and the Preservation Society's involvement with it, the Charleston Justice Journey began actually as a student capstone project at Furman University several years ago and was ultimately launched locally in 2018 by an all-volunteer team of educators and professionals who are just really passionate about investing in telling the undertold story of Charleston's African-American history. And with the goal of ensuring the long-term sustainability of the Charleston Justice Journey is a dynamic, growing inventory of sites significant to Charleston civil rights history, CJJ became a project of the Preservation Society in 2019, while still maintaining the advisory support of the original volunteer team. So this level of research and documentation and mapping and maintenance, it really is a full-time job. And so, you know, this incredible team of volunteers is still very much involved in how we shape these narratives. But fortunately, we as the Preservation Society have been able to take this project under our organizational umbrella to kind of work to support it and think about how we can sustain it long term. Because as I mentioned earlier, we really do feel like this is an initiative with endless capacity to be expanded. We hope that adding sites to this platform will never end. And so to that end, we would not be where we are today without our Charleston Justice Journey internship program. And with the support of several incredible graduate students since 2019, with a really special passion for documenting Charleston's Black history, we have been able to launch multiple sites with several more to come soon. And we are actually very excited to welcome our newest CJJ intern on board in just a little over a month. So we typically have interns in-house over the summer and fall months with a little hiatus in the spring. And so we're very excited to get started and hit the ground running again this summer, hopefully as our research institutions open up more so than they were this time last year, which is very encouraging. And so here I just want to pause to talk a little bit about our research process, because that's something that has been evolving and is really important to how this initiative it takes shape on a month-by-month basis. And so our staff works alongside our graduate interns to offer support for site-specific archival and historical research conducted both online and in our city's many valuable research institutions like the Avery Research Center, the South Carolina Historical Society, the Charleston County Public Library, especially the South Carolina Room, just to name a few. And we are so lucky here in Charleston to have this plethora of research institutions and wide availability of resources. I think that's something that is really rare. Not all communities have that, and not all communities have the coordination and collaboration between institutions that we have as well. We're very fortunate, and so it's always really enriching to kind of walk our interns through that and introduce them to these processes if they aren't already familiar, to really invest in pulling these resources together to craft narratives that inform each individual CJJ site. So one primary research challenge for this specific field of study is that archives have historically under-collected African American history. And so institutions like the Avery Research Center for African American History or the Low Country Digital Library that really specialize in housing personal collections are invaluable to piecing together stories that have not yet been fully told. So these are family papers donated to these institutions to help fill in the gap in the historical record that really is centuries long. When you think about what is represented most prominently in the historical record, it's not the stories of African American contributions, of African American excellence, and just the story of daily life in our city over time. And so here are just a few examples of resource types that really help to inform CJJ research. So we've got census data, newspapers, photographs, maps, plats, architectural plans, as well as personal keepsakes and memorabilia. And that being said, the importance of community outreach is also essential to our research and interpretation process. We do not claim to be the experts on this history as the Preservation Society, but we do recognize our role as stewards. So our staff, alongside our interns, work to identify subject matter experts in the community and engage collaboratively to capture oral histories and provide accurate, sensitive content to tell the story of Charleston's complex, challenging, and often very painful history. So as you can see by this kind of zoomed out view of this map here for the Charleston Justice Journey, we really are just getting started, with several sites throughout the Low Country identified as future CJJ sites, which you can see by the white markers here in comparison to the yellow, which are already live. You can see here, for example, the Progressive Club on Johns Island and the Keith School in Cainhoy, which we've identified as sites in progress, meaning that research is underway and that we're working on it, and that we hope to have this content live soon for access and interpretation. But this really underscores yet another research challenge. And that is in that while all Black history is generally underdocumented in comparison to white history, none more so than in rural contexts. So that really does impact a lot of areas in our region. And that's a primary reason for what you're seeing here, in that a majority of the initial research compiled has been concentrated in Charleston's urban peninsular core. But as we grow our research capacity, we're working really hard to change that. And that's something that we would absolutely welcome input on. And that's one reason why I'm so excited to be sharing this initiative with you all tonight, because we're really casting our net into communities outside of the Charleston Peninsula to identify sites and to identify subject matter experts and the location of resources that maybe have not been widely publicized or traditionally known. And so that's exciting, and I appreciate the chance to hopefully connect with some of you all after this. But with background on how we research and document these stories, I did want to take this opportunity to share with you just how, So just wanted to take this opportunity to walk you through a couple of our more recently added sites to help you navigate the journey, but to also better understand how this website functions and what the nature of some of these stories entail. So how this site functions is that from the larger map that we were just looking at, you can zoom in to browse the individual sites. And you can actually click on the markers here to illuminate which site we're looking at, and then click to learn more. So to give an overview of our newest CJJ sites, we will start with a brief look at the Crest Building sit-in, which is regarded as one of the most important and revolutionary examples of civil rights activism in Charleston's history. And so for those who may not be familiar with this story, a brief recap is that on April 1st, 1960, 24 students from the All-African American Burke High School in downtown Charleston entered the Crest Building on King Street and sat down at the lunch counter, where they were later arrested for occupying a space reserved for white patrons only. And this pivotal moment in 1960 really paved the way for the next several years of increasing civil rights activism as part of what is now known as the Charleston movement. And in honor of this incredible story and the remarkable individuals behind it, the Preservation Society installed an historic marker on this site in 2013 as part of our Thomas, May, and Pinckney Alliance, which was a group or a task force that was established under the umbrella of the Preservation Society to identify, document, and elevate stories of sites significant to the variety of African American experiences across the Low Country throughout history, and also really to acknowledge contributions of African American craftsmen and just how that's impacted Charleston's built environment and its developmental history. So on this slide, you can see how each Charleston Justice Journey site page is actually structured, and keeping in mind the research project process that we just talked about. Hopefully we'll see how that actually plays out here in the format of how this information is made accessible to the public. So what we have here is a peer-reviewed informative text. All of the resources used for this text are actually sourced at the bottom. So as you're reading, you can actually go through and identify where each piece of information came from, which we think is really important. There's a lot of information out there, and it's really great that kind of information is being compiled informally in a digital form, but oftentimes it's really difficult to understand where the information came from initially, and to really vet it and ensure that it is the most accurate information. And so that's something that we really want to contribute to from an historical record standpoint, from an academic standpoint. So well-sourced, well-vetted information. At the bottom, which we'll jump to in a minute, I think, we also have an image gallery, one of which is here, and these help to contribute to interpretation of the text. But perhaps most importantly to us, we also have a Learn More section here on the side. And what this does is it encourages users to continue their research beyond this web page. So perhaps you found the Crest Building sit-in text and the story very compelling. Well, we have here the opportunity to continue on in your understanding of this site's history by watching a documentary on Harvey Gantt, who was a participant in this sit-in and demonstration as a student, and went on to become the first Black mayor of Charlotte and the first Black student to be admitted to Clemson and go on to study architecture. And it's just a really fascinating way to kind of continue your education, and there's multiple opportunities here. Okay. I think that is all on the Crest Building. So just one more site to kind of walk you through to continue to give an understanding of what kind of sites we document on the Charleston Justice Journey. And I know we talked a lot about the long civil rights movement. Both of these that we chose because they're newer actually are fairly similar in offering interpretation of the actual kind of more widely known civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. However, Mother Emanuel is a really great example of or an illustration of the long civil rights movement, and we'll get into that, in that it really does speak to the story of the African American experience and struggle from the early 19th century until now. So launched very recently, this very important site honoring the history and the legacy of the Emanuel AME congregation. It really does span more than 200 years. It's one of the oldest African American congregations in the Southeast. And Mother Emanuel is perhaps also one of the nation's most recognized symbols of the long and ongoing struggle for racial justice. So in addition to seeking to honor the congregation and the legacy of the 9 parishioners whose lives were tragically lost in the horrific 2015 shooting at Mother Emanuel, the CJJ site aims to bring focus to the centuries of history that have shaped not only the congregation, but our entire city in the course of civil rights history in the United States. From the story of Denmark Vesey to the church's use as a staging site during the Crest Building sit-in, and even the hospital workers' strike of 1969, dozens of the most important moments and movements in Charleston civil rights history have had their roots in Mother Emanuel AME. And many of these sites and stories are also represented by their own individual sites on the Charleston Justice Journey, which really does further illustrate the connections between history and place. So in addition to the Crest Building, which we looked at, you can also learn about the hospital workers' strike of 1969 on the Charleston Justice Journey, as well as Denmark Vesey. So I would encourage you all, if you're not familiar with these stories or want to learn more, to check out these individual sites on the website. This CJJ site also highlights the ongoing evolution of the church's physical presence on Calhoun Street, which is important, and documents the plans to honor the Mother Emanuel victims and survivors through the installation of a memorial courtyard and garden. So this is important in thinking about, again, this ongoing story and the connection to the historic built environment. Our historic architecture, our streetscapes, they're not static, and they do tell a story. And so I also thought that this was a really good illustration of that, of how we're aiming to draw these connections across time, across place, and across our city. So if you haven't had the chance to explore this website, we encourage you to do so, to learn more and really dig into the details about the stories that we just shared, and to continue the journey for yourself. And we would also encourage you to get out and about and visit some of these sites that you may not have visited before, which is another important component of the Charleston Justice Journey from an education standpoint, is really taking the journey for yourself. So not only can you access this website on your desktop or your computer, but it's also accessible on a mobile platform. And so you can log on to the Charleston Justice Journey if you're downtown, which is where most of the sites are concentrated right now. A lot of them are located within close proximity to one another. So you can actually read the history and move from site to site, which would be a really good use of time. I've done it myself. And so that is a suggestion. And then as mentioned before, we're really looking to the community as we focus on the Charleston Justice Journey as an ongoing project of the Preservation Society to hear from members of the community what sites you would like to see included on the journey that are representative of the unique neighborhoods and geographic locations throughout the city. So again, we don't claim to be the experts and all knowing of all Black history in Charleston and in the Low Country. And so we rely on really engaged and informed citizens like you to, if you've done your own research or if there's an important site in your community or neighborhood, to reach out and to let us know and to share your personal memories, your personal stories, collections that you may have access to, and to help us to better complete the narrative of Charleston's fuller story. And so you can do that by not only visiting charlestonjusticejourney.org, which is affiliated with the Preservation Society website. So once you're there, you can explore the rest of our site, but also through emailing our email here, advocacy@preservationsociety.org. We check that regularly. You can give us a call also. I should have put our office number on here, but that's on our website. So at any point, you can feel free to reach out to us to learn more about the project, to share your stories, and learn how you can better support this initiative. So let's see, it looks like there actually may have been a couple of questions come through that I'm not sure if I can see it. But Andrew, I would absolutely be happy to open it up to questions at this point.
Yeah, no, there are a couple of questions have come in. First and foremost, this is amazing. I'm always impressed. I've been with the Historical Society now for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years. I'm always impressed by the resources out there that just, you never know where they're going to pop up. And I completely had no idea about this. And this is a great site. I was looking through it as we were going through. Really informative, really well researched. So kudos on that. A couple questions from Bill Pear. Number one is, and I think this is coming back to one of our previous meetings, is we had some of the actual participants from the hospital workers strike come in and spoke to us at one of our previous, which is great. It was a great experience. We loved having them in there. But he was wondering, have you guys been able to collect oral histories from participants in these events, like the Crest sit-in? Are they linked on the website? Are these, things that, given that these people are alive,
Yeah.
Do we have
Great question. So fortunately, we are not the only organization working on that front. There's been so much great oral history work done. A lot is available through the Low Country Digital History Initiative and through the Low Country Digital Library, through our partners at Historic Charleston Foundation. They've been working on this simultaneously, and we do have, I should have mentioned this in the talk, but as you're looking through the individual sites, there's some video content that is actually linked for some of the sites. Particularly, I believe it is the hospital workers strike, Gadsden's Wharf, and there's a couple more. It's not representative of all of the content for each individual site, but those incorporate some oral history components. But to also answer the question, yes, we do link to outside resources. We have not formally recorded oral histories as part of this project yet, but that's not off the table. That's something that as we staff up and kind of develop our internship program further too, that's something that we would just really love to expand and have incorporated moving forward.
Well, I'm going to gently prod the members of our board to get in touch with you at some point, because there was some great stories, and we'd love to have more people hear them too.
Definitely.
One more question from Bill, and that's, how much have you done with respect to heirs property and legal challenges with respect to, just in terms of I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah. So as far as documenting that or kind of grappling with that struggle as part of the Charleston justice journey, I can't say that there's any particular site that really does highlight that as a challenge in our community. However, it certainly is. And that's something that as an organization and in the everyday advocacy work that we do, we come face to face with all the time. And from a standpoint of properties that maybe are experiencing neglect in different parts of our community, that's a lot of times unwillful neglect. There's just really these pressing challenges with ownership that really do make preservation challenging from a financial feasibility standpoint. But also, we really have been doing or delving into the world of really advocating and seeking to preserve our many diverse settlement communities throughout our region. And so that's something that we are really hoping to better represent as part of the Charleston justice journey as we continue to expand our scope east of the Cooper, but also north on the peninsula and into West Ashley. The city of Charleston is doing a lot of great documentation work in that area right now as part of the city plan update process. I don't know if anyone has gotten to see that yet, but it's really opened our eyes as an organization to, it's not just these areas along Highway 41 or Highway 17 in Mount Pleasant that have traditionally been known as, these kind of pockets of African-American property ownership. It's our entire community, and these landscapes are underdocumented. They're at tremendous risk. And so that is something that, as we think about our lane in the Charleston justice journey and what the importance of it is and relevance of it is right now, that's something we would absolutely want to contribute to documenting. And so that is in the works. So good question.
And there's no shortage of good work to be done. So it's very exciting. It's very exciting to see the progress you made. I was just looking through. I was very impressed. Kim, one of our board members, has a question. How do you reach out to the African-American community for their input? How do you find people? How do you learn about the true memory of the history in rural areas where, it's not necessarily as connected or, as tapped in as the downtown areas?
It's definitely a challenge. And as far as, especially the rural communities in particular, and I have only been a part of the Preservation Society staff for about 3 years. And so I have fortunately been able to benefit from these long-standing connections in the community. We're really, I mentioned earlier on in the talk, our Thomas May and Pinckney Alliance. And if anyone has any questions about that specifically and kind of the work that task force did, I can go into greater detail. But really what that alliance was this really involved group of members of Charleston's Black community who are incredibly just tied to our various research institutions and have incredible memories and family ties, long-standing generational involvement in Charleston. And so that group has been the most valuable resource to me personally, just as I've sought to kind of help contribute and kind of help the Preservation Society steer this documentation ship. And so what it really looks like as far as outreach is, if we're working on a site and we are trying to identify a point of contact, we'll kind of think about who we know that's been involved in either advocacy or education issues there in the past, and we'll ask them to help us connect with folks who might be willing to contribute to these stories. And so that's one avenue. Another way that we often encourage our interns to kind of approach this research is, before you even get started in the archives, take a broad survey online through the newspapers and identify people who are already telling the story, who are maybe, active participants in advocacy for these sites now, or like you pointed out, Andrew, are still living and can speak to their experiences from the time of or period of significance that we're looking at. So we really encourage our interns to start there and to see if there is a way to reach out to them. And I would be remiss to not point out that our academic community and our academic partners at the College of Charleston, at the Avery Research Center, at the Citadel, at Clemson, these are all people who really help us make these connections as well on a daily basis.
Hey, it's Jessica. I have a really quick follow-up question to that. I was just curious, how do you juggle the challenges of kind of these inherent biases in historic records? I'm sure that there's a lot of records you find that, you know, probably don't tell the story as the local community would. In what ways do you document history and cite those, but also interact with local communities to maybe address some of these biases that you find?
There is most definitely a ton of bias, especially in secondary resources. And in primary resources, honestly, you know, kind of the period documentation, you know, we really seek to be objective in the way that we present that information. And I'm trying to think of a good example. I know that we've done that on a specific site in the Charleston Justice Journey, where we say, you know, hey, this is the source of the research that we had to work with, and here's why, you know, this is problematic. So it's really just bringing to light the original author, who they were, what their story was, their intended audience. It's really just putting it all out into the open, and seeking to recognize what social forces would have been at play at the time that would have impacted how the history would have been documented then. But if there is an opportunity to, let's say there was a newspaper article that documented a civil rights demonstration in the 1960s that was clearly biased in one direction, that would be a really great opportunity to then pair that up against an oral history of somebody who participated in the demonstration, and really weigh those two and try to always give priority to the storytellers who actually lived these experiences, and allow for members of the African American community to tell the story themselves. And so, yeah, oral history is a great way to do that, as well as just informal conversations as I mentioned before, vetting the final form narratives. We send those to a large group of advisors, and really make sure that if there is any bias that's implicit, that those are addressed before this information goes public.
A lot of questions coming in. Let's go through them. So Beth Bush has a question. Will the Charleston Justice Journey be partnering in any way with the International African American Museum to share your work? You know, would there be like postings, like you can hit a QR code or something up on the wall and you can see a listing?
Good question. I don't know about a QR code. We are definitely interested in partnering with the International African American Museum. They've got a brand new staff that we've been corresponding with. It's actually interesting. I didn't mention this in kind of the chronology of how CJJ got started, but it initially was intended to be a project of the International African American Museum. You'll see the previous executive director, Michael Boulware Moore, actually speaking in some of the videos. He was very involved in the early the origination of this project. But at the time, a couple of years ago, that staff, they were so focused on just getting the museum off the ground. And so it was really great for us to kind of be able to come in and say, hey, you know, we can offer a little bit more sustainable support here. And so there was partnership to make that happen. But we look forward to continuing to work with them, especially from a genealogical research perspective. That is going to be an incredible resource moving forward. So I hope that answers that question.
Absolutely. One from Fred Rosenberg. The Daniel Island Company was very careful to preserve African-American cemeteries on Daniel Island. I presume they're doing the same thing in the Cane White Plantation area. What is the issue with other developers, or how do other developers deal with it? Or, you know, are other people as sensitive to that as, you know, some of the people at the Daniel Island Company?
Oh gosh, no, good question. I definitely, it is problematic to kind of leave the stewardship of these cemeteries up to the wills of individual developers. We can't say that everyone plays nice, as we've seen in the newspaper lately. I won't go any further than that, but it's something that we're looking at very closely and struggle with from a regulatory perspective. There is not a lot of great protection for historic cemeteries. There's good state level protection for access to cemeteries and making sure that descendants of people buried in burial grounds are able to maintain visitation rights. But as far as actually preserving the grounds and preserving the burials, it's not super well codified and provided for at a local level, especially. So we really do have to be very vigilant in documenting those sites and establishing relationships with developers up front. So,
and here comes the harder, more controversial question. How should we best address / resolve the African American cemetery findings in Clements Ferry Road? Or do you have an opinion on that, given that it's been in the news recently?
I mean, I think just relationship building is what we as an organization are really trying to do right now. That's always our first line of defense. You know, we really never want to turn to, you know, media fights or legal battles if we can avoid them. And so we've really been endeavoring in the past several weeks and months to work with community members, representatives from local organizations in that area, as well as our elected officials and the developers who are kind of involved. And we really hope for a positive outcome there.
As do we all. Bill's got one more question for you guys. What's the toughest obstacle or challenge you find in your research of just like going out and finding people, and you know, in your day-to-day, what's the hardest part of your job?
Well, I would say specifically with this vein of research, bringing together sources for rural history is the greatest challenge. I mean, like I said, as far as what is underdocumented most prominently, it's that. I mean, there weren't, you know, really organized research compilation efforts in these communities like we fortunately had in Charleston throughout the 20th century. And so much of that information is just not easily and readily accessible. You know, as far as even things as simple as, you know, death records and property ownership records, and just kind of being able to piece together the story of these communities. So we really do struggle with where to start there. And so again, I think that really does point to kind of the concentration of our sites on the peninsula, because especially with, you know, our interns, we're really trying to give them a great research experience, and sending them out into kind of no man's land is challenging. So major obstacles there, but that's where we really rely on our partners to help us.
Absolutely. I don't recall if it was our last guest or the guest before, but we had Dr. John Navin from the College of Charleston, and he's got a great book on the Grimm years, which is, you know, just sort of early history of Charleston. Yeah. I find that very interesting. Is that an area that you guys would like to focus on in the future, or is that something you've already focused on, sort of that early period of settlement in Charleston and how it relates to the Black experience?
It definitely is kind of this, you know, nebulous history that undergirds so much of kind of how the story of Charleston's various communities evolved together. You know, it's really understanding the foundations of the various communities and how they settled and where and why, and even just the complexities of that early period of, you know, the enslaved experience versus the experience of free people of color. I mean, entirely different worlds coexisting in the same space and not very well documented. So yes, we definitely are interested in digging deeper there. And one source I did want to touch on, or resource rather, is a project that we actually just launched through the Low Country Digital History Initiative. It's a digital exhibit called the Morris Street Business District Research Project. And what that does is kind of take the scope of something like the Charleston Justice Journey and bring it to a really hyper-local level, and looking just at Morris Street and its evolution over time. And that allowed us to start really early with the earliest land use maps that we had, and kind of go from there. So I would highly recommend, I don't know if I have the ability to drop that in the chat anywhere, but I'd be happy to share that that link with you guys to distribute in addition to the Charleston Justice Journey. But yeah.
Absolutely, we can make that available online.
Great.
Kim has suggested, to what extent can rural churches help with respect to historical archives, since, churches are typically, one of the better sources of information.
Absolutely. Especially for interment records, burial records. I think kind of the parish specific records have been hugely helpful. And so, yes, I think there is a struggle, again, just with underrepresentation of African-American people in those records, but not to say that those don't exist, but huge resource, but yet a huge gap.
You mentioned initially about the connection with Furman, the foundings of the program. Is there an upstate version of the project? Do you partner with other entities around the state? If so, is it helpful to kind of track movements and people across the state if there was a larger movement people were involved in?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, there was not kind of a sister project established for the upstate, but Historic Columbia, I think that's what they're called, the kind of a very similar organization in Columbia. I know that they have done a lot of really great work as far as documenting site-specific histories in that area. There is also the Green Book of South Carolina, which is an online platform that offers just a statewide view of sites significant to South Carolina's civil rights history. So there are opportunities to kind of take a more 30,000 foot view of our state's historic sites that pertain to Black history and civil rights history, but not anything that's an exact emulation or replica of this project. But that would be great. We would be open to partnership for sure.
So I guess my next question is, what site are you most excited about of the things you're looking at prospectively, or like what would you love to bring online next in terms of, things you're looking at?
I am most excited to expand outward into outlying communities that have been even more underdocumented than sites on the peninsula. Really excited about the Progressive Club. That's on Johns Island. That's coming very soon. We're getting close to the finish line there. And also I'm excited about the Keith School. We've been working closely for years with Fred Lincoln to really kind of better understand that particular site. We've been out there a few times myself, and would just love to kind of highlight that particular site. It's just, an example of how preserving a single building can really help a community kind of claim its identity and have a site to return to remember its history. And so I'm excited about those two.
What are some of your check boxes? You said that these are sites that you're developing, that you're working on. At what point do you consider a site to be fully developed and ready to be on the website and launched? Is there a certain criteria you have for how much information you collect, or?
It's tough. We always talk about just kind of the rabbit hole of information that can be collected to tell a site story. And we really try to keep it as short form and digestible as possible. But it is a challenge because the history and the stories that we find are often so rich. And we often have to kind of tell our interns, you've got 250 to 500 words. We can't, write a book about this site. So it's really, I think, sometimes what can be a challenge and slow the process down, but also is just helps us, establish a checkpoint, is really ensuring a digestible format, really making sure that the history is well represented in a summarial, succinct form. It's well sourced. We've gotten all those vetted by our advisory board. We've got great imagery to go along with them. We've got a robust Learn More section. All of these things are kind of our boxes that need to be checked before we feel comfortable putting them on the website.
Does anyone else have questions? We're empty on the queue right now. This is all fascinating stuff. I can't wait to dig through this website later. Here's a question I have. To what extent are the documents, you know, I'm a data scientist by trade, so I'm always interested in scraping information from documents. To what extent are these documents scanned in, machine readable? You know, is there work going on there to, like, you know, make it more digestible, make it more searchable, or is it just sort of images of just scripts that people, you know, have to sort of hand interpret and parse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the citywide or really region-wide digitization effort is ongoing. You know, I really commend the Low Country Digital Library and Digital History Initiative for their work to really provide a wide variety of resources for people to engage with to better understand our city's history. If you haven't checked out any of those exhibits or collections before, would highly recommend it. You could spend an entire Saturday just kind of going through their collections and learning about our city's history in a variety of mediums. You know, it's artwork that they've digitized, it's documents, it's photographs, people's actual photo albums that you can kind of flip through, or pamphlets from, you know, the 1920s that talk about, that really, you know, are highlighting how the tourism industry worked 100 years ago. I mean, it's just fascinating material. And so I think that really keeps it dynamic, and it's great to know that all of that is out there for the public to engage with.
Yeah, no, it's great how much of these resources are available, especially, you know, with respect to the library system. And I'm very impressed with how much has been collected over the years and how much there is available out there.
Yeah.
Oh, one more from Kim. Thank you. Much work has been done. Much work has been done. Thank you for your team. Let us know how we can help. Inspiring presentation. You have lots of supporters here in the Daniel Island Historical Society, and I'm sure people will want to reach out and help you insofar as we can with respect to Cane Hoy and the area as a whole.
We're a small staff, and we would love as much help as we can get. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and hope maybe to be able to come back in a year or two with dozens of more sites to report back on. That would be the dream. So.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. I mean, what a great resource. And, you know, it's just so neat to have the historic and just kind of this emotional connection off the physical space of the city. And I know that we look forward to working with you. And I'm sure we'll have some internal discussions. And please, if, you know, obviously she's giving out her resources. So if there's anything, you know, that, you know, sites that you feel you can contribute. I can also make sure Bill has this information to pass on. I don't know if you're interested, if it's possible to let us see some of these slides to distribute later. I know this is going to be shared via Facebook. It's recorded, so our members will have access to this information. So hopefully you'll get a lot of good feedback from this, and we look forward to working with you in the future for sure. This is such a great project that you guys are doing. And I know that you have our full support here. So thank you again for telling us about what you do. And I know I'm sure you'll be hearing from us in the near future for sure.
Great. Well, thank you, Jessica, Andrew, and to everybody who attended and had great questions. It was a pleasure.
If I get any more questions that get feeded to me, I'll have to forward them to your email and see if there's anything additional that comes in. I know we have people that do watch the presentation after the fact. And I just wanted to tell our members to continue to look at the social media. I know Bill's been doing a great job of putting a bunch of stuff out there, a lot of information, a lot of hot topics in the area, and keep watching the feed for some more information about next month's speaker series. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
All right, have a great night.